just for some background for those who might be hearing this episode without having heard the previous ones, I am about halfway through a series of talks which are taken from the Mangala Sutta, or the Sutta about blessings, from the Buddhist scriptures. And the big picture is that there are 38 steps from very basic virtues moving towards more esoteric virtues which are described by the Buddha. And the idea is that if you jump in anywhere on this little staircase, then if you can practice correctly, then it will lead you to the next step upwards on the ladder. So you can divide them into 38 steps, or you can divide them into groupings, in which case you divide them into 10 different sets of teachings. And at this particular point we are at the 6th grouping, which is to do with availing ourselves of the readiness of mind so that we can start to move towards more esoteric practices. And the last 2 steps that we looked at were fairly heavy going for the audience. We looked at overcoming temptations of various sorts. We also looked at becoming free of intoxicants, so mostly fairly negative sort of associations with these sorts of subject matter. But the idea is that setting out on a spiritual path or a spiritual quest, there are certain things that can hold us back from making progress. And if the temptations and intoxicants have been dispensed with, then there is something more of a pull factor towards the spiritual quest, which is really seeing the value of what we are looking for, seeing the opportunity of the spiritual quest in order to inspire ourselves to take the first step on the path. So we've cut the things holding us back in terms of intoxicants and temptations, but now we can turn towards what that leaves us with, which is something much more inspiring in our lives. And the actual name for this blessing in the Pali language is non-recklessness in the Dharma, which may mean absolutely nothing to you. So I tried to rephrase it in a way which might be slightly more meaningful in present-day parlance and called it living with intention, because you can actually Google that and find things, yes, which are relatively similar to what we're talking about today. But you might say it's almost like not looking a spiritual gift horse in the mouth, realizing the opportunities and value in this life that we have left to lead to find more about the truth of life and existence and the world in wherever the opportunity arises. In order, if we have the opportunity to look for all these things but fail to take that opportunity, then that would be what the Buddha would call reckless, or to use the Pali word for that, pamato. And you might think, well, it's all the same, like take, given the amount of spare time I have, do what you can, not exactly grasping at the opportunity with both hands. But in the word recklessness, sometimes we don't see how much store is put by this within the Buddhist practice. And just to hit you with some quotes, the word recklessness is really quite central in the Buddhist practice. There's verses from the Dhammapada that go appamato amatapadang, pamato machunopadang, which loosely translated is that non-recklessness is a pathway to immortality, whereas recklessness is a pathway to death. So especially the death of your spiritual ambitions. So, the picture you can see there is of a person who is obviously not reckless, looking down on the lives which reckless people live, where basically they are caught up in all sorts of vanities and appearances. The Buddha said that a person who has seen through the sort of delusions of the life that people in general lead, it's like looking down from a high up perspective on a toiling crowd of fools, just as if you were seeing the whole big picture from a vantage point high up above. Yeah. So what sort of things are we talking about when we are referring to recklessness? What are the things that are so valuable or so precious that we can't afford to be reckless about them? Well, in the list of things which are essential for spiritual self-transformation, there are things which are so precious that we can't afford to waste them. And these would include the time we have, our youthful good health, longevity, and opportunities to better oneself. So time is always valuable to us because there are so many things potentially that can fritter away our time very easily, whether it be sitting around gossiping all day or catching up on fashion magazines or rehearsing your TikTok dance. Unfortunately, time waits for no man or woman, so we can't afford to waste it on things which are of no ultimate consequence. As for youthfulness, it's a second resource for spiritual transformation. Some people feel that the prime years of their life are not something they want to use for spiritual purposes. It's something which you have to wait until you've got one foot in the grave before you start getting spiritual. What do you reckon? However, if you are lucky enough to reach the retirement age, in fact, the amount of energy you have left to bring to bear for spiritual striving may be diminished. So it's, even if you're young and you sort of get it early on in life that spiritual things are worth devoting your time to, then don't hang around waiting for yourself to get old before you actually put your ideas into practice. Use your youthful energy to strive while you're still young. It's something that I reflect on more and more with each passing year. As for good health, it's also a huge resource. If you are of good health, then this is something which you can really strive without having those sort of obstacles impinging on your efforts the whole of the time. Longevity is very useful too. Most of us assume that we're going to get the full life expectancy, because like it's a statistic, isn't it? So we must be at least average. But at the same time, we all know people younger than us who have already passed. Am I right? And it could quite as easily have been us. So really the fact we're still here is already a sort of little miracle in a sense. So being able to put all the knowledge and skills that we have into spiritual transformation is something which is really something we need to do if we can. It's said that even at full steam ahead, if you wanted to work on yourself to solve all the possible bad habits that you still have remaining in your character, possibly you would manage to overcome about 10% of those habits in a single lifetime. So, and that's when you're trying. That's when you're living intentionally. But if you're not even trying, then you can imagine how much less you would be able to perfect in yourself in a single lifetime. So lifetimes are short in the big perspective which Buddhism tends to take. So really talking about recklessness, we're talking about the difference between a person treading water and a person who is actually making some progress in the direction which they have chosen. And we're not really talking about laziness here, we're just talking about the tendencies which people have to complacency about opportunities in their lives for spiritual cultivation. And there are three main sorts of inertia which lead to this complacency, which are almost like blind spots in our worldview. The first of these is known as kusita, which means thinking you don't need to do anything good in your life and you still expect a good outcome. So you don't do anything good, but you think you deserve to get good outcomes. So the Buddha called this kusita. And this would include, for example, students who don't bother studying but who expect to pass their examinations, people who do no work and expect to get a promotion, and people who don't do any sort of decent behaviors in their life but expect a big welcome at the pearly gates at the end of their life. The second slightly worse variation on this, which the Buddha called duccirita, is people who do nothing but treat others badly, but who still expect everyone to like them. What do you reckon? Maybe you know a few people like this. And the third variation, which is probably more commonplace, is people who do negligible amounts of good deeds, but who expect disproportionately huge outcomes from what they've done. For example, they might do a tiny favor for someone, but they expect to be remembered and receive that person's loyalty for the rest of their life. Or a person who lights incense on a Buddhist shrine and hopes that will secure them spiritual enlightenment in the future. So, if we're looking at definitions, non-recklessness, according to the actual name for this blessing, would mean generally being careful or thorough. So that's generally non-recklessness. If you're talking about non-recklessness with reference to the Dharma or the teachings or the truth or wisdom, as you might call it, it means having a degree of mastery over your own actions of body, speech and mind, never allowing yourself to fall into those sorts of couch surfing, three sorts of behaviors I noticed, any of those sorts of complacency, but working in earnest the whole of the time to do something to improve your practice. So what do you reckon? Just a good sort of ideal to have? Well, in Buddhism it has actually a very central place. Like the Buddha said, it's like the pathway to death. Do not have it, then it's usually something fairly serious. But yet, if you have it, it's a sort of pathway to immortality. Pretty interesting. You hear a lot of Dhamma teachings here, and maybe you have an idea about some of them being more or less central to the big picture of Buddhist teachings. Any idea? You probably remember a few of them here and there. Is there a sort of structure to all the teachings which are given, maybe? Never thought about things like that? Are there things which are central to core teachings for Buddhism and some which are a little bit more peripheral? What do you reckon? Some of the teaching you hear, they don't seem to be that sort of like on point. A lot seem to be more relevant. You think about such things? Well, if you were to say what were the most central teachings which are sort of indispensable to Buddhist practice, would you be able to answer that question? Give you, let's say, 3 things which are the most important to remember from Buddhism. Okay. Something like this. Avoid doing bad stuff, do only good stuff, and purify the mind. These are teachings from something called the Ovada Patimokkha on the Makhādeva Day in February. You often hear them quoted. And if you don't remember anything else, then these 3 things are pretty much what Buddhism is all about. Sometimes they're referred to as the heart of the Buddhist teachings. And even though there are many more teachings in Buddhism, but generally they tend to be an elaboration of these 3 sort of pillars of Buddhism, if you like to put it that way. So if you elaborate on this, then doing good generally would mean things like, let's say, being generous, doing meditation, avoiding unwholesomeness or evil behaviors would entail keeping precepts, and purifying the mind would mean cultivating wisdom. The verse are good? Are you with me? Shall we expand on it a little bit more? Well, if you move from this to expand it up into the Eightfold Path, then you still find the 3 pillars in there. We had those practices, how to actually do them, expand it out further into what's known as the Eightfold Path. But they're still extensions of those 3 things we started out with. So we've got right view and right intention as ways of cultivating wisdom. We have right speech, right action, and right livelihood under the heading of precepts or avoiding unwholesomeness. Make sense? And for the meditation component or the doing good component, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So far so good? Have you ever seen the Buddhist scriptures? Is it a book? No, it's a bookcase of books. So some editions have got 45 volumes. Some have got up to 90, 91 volumes. So what's it all about then? You just described it in such a concise way. What have they got to write about? Well, sometimes they expand beyond this, and there's a traditional figure for all the teachings in the scriptures, which is 84,000. But again, there are expansion on the one we had at the top, the 3 pillars. Yeah? And we would have 21 items in the what's known as the Vinaya, which is the first part of the scriptures, which is mostly to do with monastic discipline, but also all the precepts and stuff in there, whether it's 5 precepts, 8 precepts, 10 precepts, 227 precepts, precepts for bhikshunis, it's all in there. 21,000. And we have the middle part, which is all the discourses. I'm talking about one of them today, the Mangala Sutta. There's plenty more of them in there, 42,000 items in the suttas. all the discourses which the Buddha gave to people who were listening to his teachings. So how much is that so far? 63,000. And then one final one is known as the Abhidhamma, which is a sort of, you might say it's an index, but it's supposed to be taken where the contextual aspects are removed, so that you can say that this is what's true for everybody, not just for particular people. It describes the way the mind works and that sort of thing. Another 21,000. So if you add up all that together, then you get 84,000 teachings in all in the Buddhist scriptures. It may be a notional figure, like it just means a lot, but certainly you can talk about the number of suttas or individual teachings in there. It's certainly approaching that number. So on this particular pagoda or pyramid here, any idea what goes on the top? If we were to put a flag on the top which said, this is what it's all aiming for, or this is what it's all derived from, what do you think we should put on the pinnacle? Nirvana? So what is nirvana? What does it actually mean? It could be a place, it could be a state of mind, a very pure state of mind maybe, one that's free of any impurities anymore. Make sense? That's what it's all for. That's what all these things are devoted towards. They're all aiming in this general direction. But nirvana has many ways of describing it. You could call nirvana the ultimate state of non-recklessness, because it's also immortality. Yeah? Make sense? Other things you could call it are arahantship, freedom from defilements, or freedom from suffering. So that's all in that concept. That's all what we're aiming for, the little flag on the top. So actually what we're talking about today, although it might sound a little bit glib, like, recklessness is not sort of like not running across the street without looking for traffic first. Actually, it's very central to the whole idea of Buddhist cultivation and practice. Really, it is the purpose which all the good things we do are directed towards. And it's the main sort of tent pole around which the whole structure of all the Buddhist teachings, no matter how trivial, are arranged. Yeah. So it's not just a vague instruction to, just be careful, or like, look out for volcanoes, or look out for hurricanes, look out for heavy traffic. So it's something that's more than vaguely useful. And in the final teaching of the Buddha, the graphic to go with that, called the Parinibbana Sutta, the Buddha advocated for his monks, the final speech which he gave to his monks were that our psychophysical constituents have the nature of impermanence, so therefore all of you must arouse non-recklessness. That's were his last words before he passed away. So how can we switch on to a way of life which is more intentional, more non-reckless? There are 5 areas that we can look at in this respect. And the first of these would be to avoid any of the actions of mind, speech, or physical action which are unwholesome. I think we've probably got that under control if we have avoided the temptations and intoxicants from the last 2 blessings. We need to flip that around so that everything we think, speak, or do is something which leads to a positive effect towards ourselves and the world around us. 2. Third thing, need to remind ourselves that death is not the end of the story, but we still have to keep going on afterwards. Therefore, whether we know about where we're going or not, we try to prepare the best we can for that transition into lifetimes to come, to make sure that we can get towards ones which are the sort of habits that will lead us to a better place. We need to recognize that suffering arises from birth, old age, sickness and death. You might think that sounds a bit sort of depressing, but it can also inspire us with a sense of urgency to do what we can with the advantages we have to overcome as much suffering as we can in the meantime. And we should always keep our mind centered on our object of meditation. So these are reminders for ourselves that will help us to lead towards more intentional, more non-reckless living. But most people, they sort of live with a sort of slightly careless view of the value of their own lives. And I'll thus leave you with a little story about a certain king going back many aeons, and he was called King Makhādeva. And mostly if you get to be king, then you've got lots of things on your plate, lots of things to worry about. Apart from keeping the monarchy going and looking after all your subjects, plenty of things to worry about without having to worry about yourself. However, King Makhādeva, on his coronation, he did a rather strange thing, which was summon his barber. And he explained to his barber that from now on my workload is going to be much busier now that I have to look after the whole country. So I'm delegating a special duty to you, just in case I get too caught up in my own duties and I forget myself. And your job, it is to tell me immediately the first grey hair you see appearing on my head. So the barber smiled at this because it sounded like a pretty easy job. However, one day, a few years later, the barber spotted the first grey hair on the head of the king. And when the barber passed on the news to the king's face turned as white as a sheet. And immediately he summoned all the people to a big assembly, all the people in the kingdom, all his courtiers, all his ministers, and he announced, today, after many years ruling this country, the first sign of deterioration has appeared on my body. It has therefore come to time for me to dedicate myself to the full cultivation of good deeds for my own spiritual destiny. So I hereby abdicate the throne, pass the throne to my son, and then the king retreated into the forest and became a hermit. You know what a hermit is? Not Kermit, hermit. Yes, because there's no Buddhism around in those days to sort of become a monk, so he did the best he could, which was to become a sort of ascetic living in the forest. And he meditated until the end of his days. And actually this particular individual, many lifetimes later, became the Buddha or the Bodhisattva. Yes. So the example he set is very different from most people these days who, when they first grey hair appears on their head, what do? Do they think of impending death? No, they surf the internet to find a good price for advanced anti-grey hair growth supplement. Yes. So instead of using the deterioration of their body as a teacher to themselves to catalyze a sense of urgency in their spiritual practice, which would be a good example of living with intention, they neglect the ultimate level of meaning in life until it's too late. Yeah. So I will continue to talk a little bit more about ways in which we can cultivate this mindfulness which brings us non-recklessness. There's not a place in the 38 blessings for the particular topic of mindfulness, so next time, which will be next Thursday, I will talk about the slightly more popular subject of mindfulness, especially in its relation to how mindfulness can help to bring us to a place of non-recklessness if it is understood correctly. But for today, I'll leave you with a few announcements. Firstly, if you are new to meditation today, and you found it useful, something you'd like to do more of, then I would advocate that you try to meditate a little each day if you can. Maybe start out with 20 minutes a day. It's a good length of time to see some progress, little by little, and you can build up on the length of time once it becomes a daily habit as you feel the inclination to do so. If you're a little bit hazy about the meditation technique, you can make full use of what's known as the MindGem app, which is free to download onto iOS or Android, and it has more than 100 audio tracks leading meditation and also wisdom talks as well, which you can listen to from various teachers in our tradition. So you can meditate along to the sound of that, and it even has a timer, and I think it keeps track of if you did meditation 3 days in a row. It gives you a little sort of smile or something as well. Here we have classes every Tuesday and Thursday evening. On Tuesday evening the meditation is a little bit shorter, it's designed more for beginners, and Thursday is a little bit more elaborate. So we have 45 minutes meditation, and generally these talks are also available online. And not today, because all our technical department have headed for the hills, but generally speaking, you can also catch up on those via the YouTube or Facebook pages of the temple. Yeah. And every Saturday we still have this remnant of the pandemic, which is Zoom meditation teachings, which for between 7 and 8 p.m. each Saturday is a teaching and meditation which is held for audiences throughout Europe. So if you join that Zoom, apart from being able to ask questions and stuff, you also see quite a lot of English-speaking meditators from around Europe and beyond that as well. It's quite a nice atmosphere on a Saturday, especially if you find it more convenient to meditate from home. Next formal meditation is coming up on Tuesday the 8th of November, and it will be Loikotong themed, so the candle raft floating ceremony as it's celebrated in Thailand will be exported to here, and it will involve floating candle lotus things on the fish pond together. If you want to come in person or online, it's on the same European Zoom channel as well. And for Katina here, the 23rd of October, we are encouraging everyone to come along, participate between 9:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon. And it's a good day to bring along members of your family who maybe would like to see behind the scenes of the temple where you often go to meditate. Lots of food going at around lunchtime. And we're also looking for those who can spare time to volunteer, especially in the run-up to the event, the Friday evening, maybe from 5 p.m. onwards, on the 21st, or throughout the day on Saturday the 22nd, if you can help us to set up and also rehearse parts of the ceremony as well, for those of you who have volunteered to take a part in those ceremonies too. So that's especially from 2 p.m. onwards on the Saturday. And you can also make donations as well. There are envelopes available for that, and this year the proceeds of the Katina donations will be going towards building 2 little extensions, annexes out front there. One side will be a reception area, the other side will be a kiddies corner. Yes.